Okay, so I'm here to review Capernaum. I believe that's how you pronounce it, Capernaum. I've asked a few people and then I've watched a few other reviews, and Capernaum seems to be the right pronunciation. Translated, it says at the beginning of the film, into chaos, is a Lebanese drama directed by Nadine Labaki. This film did well at Cannes, and this film has been nominated for an Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film, so it's actually up against Roma. It's a 2.5-hour film set in Lebanon about a 12-year-old boy called Zain, played by Zain al-Rafia. The premise of this film starts with this boy is essentially in court, and he's brought his parents to court. And whilst there, the judge says, you know, why have you brought your parents to court? What's the issue here? And he says, I want to sue them. And the judge says, why? And he says, for giving me life, for basically bringing him into the world. And then the film proceeds to tell the story, an incredibly elaborately moving tale of how this 12-year-old boy just fights for survival, basically. He lives with his mother and his father. He has several brothers and sisters, but he has one particular sister who's about 11 years old. He's very close with her, and so the film starts with images of him as a boy playing in the streets. You know, they're sort of play fighting with guns, which I thought was quite a neat sort of poetic image to conjure with, really, where, you know, we've seen so many images of soldiers and rebel fighters and what have you shooting in the streets of Syria, but to see these kids kind of playing with guns, you know, made out of waste and what have you, there was something, it reminded me of being a boy. It's like all boys, all kids will play these games, but there was a certain sort of tragic charm to them playing with these guns, because of course it was their lives and was probably the cause of why they all lived in this area. The reason I'm hesitating is it's an incredibly distressing film on many levels. I mean, when I came back from the screening, I was sort of thinking, you know, how would Maddie cope with watching this? How would Nadia cope with watching it? And there was a film I saw many years ago called The Selfish Giant, which was about a couple of boys in the north of England who were sort of hustling a living by getting scrap metal, you know, and it shows an unflinching sort of honesty, how poor they are and how much of a sort of day-to-day struggle they had. This was like that. You had this remarkable character, this boy. None of the actors in this are professional. They cast the film with people who'd come close to the real life, in real life, the experiences that their characters were going through. This boy Zain goes from, so basically he's within the relative safety of a household or a couple of rooms, basically, where him and 4 or 5 siblings and his sister and his parents all live. His father seems like a sort of wastrel. He's just sort of like hanging around on the sofa. He just seemed very sort of controlling and in charge, but didn't seem to do much. And then the mother, who seemed far more of a sort of firebrand and far more of a sort of present person, but she was hardened. She was a hardened character. You know, this was a family surviving. The first things that were shown about the boy are how close he is to his older sister. And really the first sort of pinch point, the dramatic pinch point in the film where I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I'm going to be able to cope with this, was him basically discovering that his older sister had started her period by seeing a spot of blood in their shared bed. And because he's working, or he knows the guy who runs the sort of general store down the road and runs errands for him, taking gas to people, he goes and steals some sanitary towels. And there's this very charming scene where she doesn't know, what do you do with these things? And he hands them to her and he goes, you put them down there, and he really helps her. And so within this 12-year-old boy, 11-year-old boy, you've got this man, you've got this incredibly caring man who's bucking this sort of patriarchal trend that's sort of all around him. And whilst he's doing this, it's all shot at his eye level. He's intercepting and coming across all sorts of men in various souks and in various sort of doorways who proposition him in either sort of violent ways. Some it's inferred, some are sexual. There's always a sort of a hand reaching out or a sort of comment or a leering possibility of danger happening somewhere. And he just deals with them with a sort of, you know, with a real sort of brisk, abrupt grown-upness, really. A swagger that you would expect of a grown man. I mean, and as he was passing through these scenes, I was thinking there's no way I'd have been able to pass through them now as a 48-year-old bloke, let alone as a 12-year-old boy. And then tragically what happens is it becomes apparent that the guy who runs the general store down the road, who's in his 40s, late 30s, early 40s, has designs on marrying Zain's sister, who's 11. And I guess the deal is that no sooner is she having her period than she's available for marriage. And you have this incredibly distressing scene, some of which is in the trailer, where she is effectively sold off to this guy It's sort of inferred that they get some chickens. I don't know if they get anything else. And that sort of instigates a moment where Zane runs off. He flees the family home. He abandons the family home and so it basically goes running off. And he runs off to this, it's a very poetic scene. He runs off to this fun fair. And when I say fun fair, I'm using the word fun in a very sort of generous way, because it's a dilapidated place of such resolute unfunness, if such a word existed, that you know, it was a staggering place of sort of bleak promises of excitement and hope. And there's an incredibly, I thought, funny little scene. So this is a film full of tragic moments and conquering these horrendous hurdles that he's got to get through, but there are moments of great charm and fun, where he, for example, on one of the rides, there's a sort of plastic mannequin that's at the top of this sort of, I don't know, a sort of roundabout of some form. And on the top of it, there's a woman, and she's obviously got boobs, and she's got a sort of a huge top on, and he goes up and he sort of peels them back just to show her boobs. No other reason other than just to do it. It's the kind of thing I'd have done in a fun fair if I was running around. And so that's what I liked about this film. On the one hand, it was set very specifically in a sort of a refugee experience in Lebanon, and through the eyes of a 12-year-old boy, you know, whose life experience is nothing like mine. And yet at the same time, there's that universality of being a boy, of just getting you know, putting your hands in things, looking in things, doing things, being a bit naughty. And then his path hooks up with an Ethiopian refugee who is in the country illegally and has forged papers and what have you, and she herself has an 18-month-old baby. And then the most remarkable chapter of the film develops, where he sort of becomes a sort of surrogate older child for this Ethiopian woman. And this strange threesome of a family develops. And I have to say, I'm presuming the child must have been about 18 months old or something. But how this director got this child, this baby, to act, this wasn't a baby just being. You know how in a film you get babies and they just kind of react to stuff and you get lucky on a take? This baby was playing a part. I mean, it was real. And I'm assuming, and maybe the woman who played its mother was its mother. She's squirreling away money, the woman, to buy a new forged sort of visa so she can work. I mean, you know, we're looking at people really sort of penny pinching for the most basic of rights. The story sort of transpires that she's basically beholden to this guy who works in the souks, who's very untrustworthy, who basically wants to buy her son off of her in exchange for a visa. And of course she doesn't want to lose her son, she doesn't want to sell her son. So, you know, you've got these transactional approaches to humans and human relationships, and, you know, transactional both in terms of, you know, the guy who's married Zane's sister, transactional in terms of the guy who's willing to give her a visa for $1,500, or I'll take your 18-month-old son and I'll sell him to a good family. Basically reducing humanity down to transactions, but transactions of the lowest common denominator. And so within this, you've got this sort of developing pressure on the Ethiopian woman. And then, God forbid, she gets pulled in. She gets pulled in for being on an illegal visa. She becomes separated from the baby. And we have this really stressful situation where Zane is effectively the main carer. So we've got a 12-year-old looking after an 18-month-old. So he has to overcome all the issues of the baby wanting to breastfeed. He has to get milk formula. He has to drag the baby around everywhere with him. The baby keeps crying at night. And there's this wonderfully charming scene where obviously in one of the sort of shacks, for want of a better expression, next door in this camp, that someone has a television, and Zane sort of manufactures and positions this mirror so that it's sort of reflecting the television, and there's this beautiful shot of them together in bed watching that as the only entertainment, the only distraction they can have. I won't give away what exactly happens with Zane and the baby, but suffice it to say that they have to make some of the most difficult decisions you could possibly imagine. And for me, it was an ever burgeoning sense of stress. But around it, don't think for a minute that this was just bleak, because there is the danger sometimes that, you know, this stuff is what they call poverty porn, where we're just sort of tuning in just to see how awful people's lives are. This was a story with some moments of great charm. The boy, Zain al-Rafea, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, is one of the most remarkable performances by a child actor I've seen in any film ever. I think the last time I saw something that made me go bam like that was E.T. There were so many scenes of quiet contemplation, of him looking and reading the situation and thinking about things in a grown-up way, you know, right down to his face in repose in the court, to whether when he was looking at the baby or sitting on the edge of the bed thinking, what the hell do I do next? How do I get out of this situation? How do I move things on? Right down to him kind of the penny dropping about what's happening to his sister. There are so many such grown-up moments of emotional transition that this boy just, God. I mean, again, tribute to the director, a tribute to the performers, but it's beautifully shot. And I was saying last night when I was talking to Nadia and her parents about it, on the one hand, it's a documentary insofar as it's a real portrait of the real emotions of what's happening to real people in these situations, and yet the director very cleverly uses, drones and some limited pieces of Steadicam operation, and it's shot in a way, it sort of has this sepia, almost ochre colour, a yellow sort of tinge to it. It's cinematic. It's not just handheld camera grabbing what it can grab. Everything felt far more considered, and yet at the same time real, which is an amazing thing to pull off. There were moments where it was like a documentary, and you could see that some of the scenes were shot in real places with real people. It's a remarkable piece of filmmaking. It's a moving piece of filmmaking, and as I say, you have to watch it just for the performance of the main boy, but not just the main boy, the 18-month-old baby. If ever there was an award for an 18-month... I mean, this 18-month-old baby probably doesn't even know that it's performed in a film. And yet it's one of the most remarkably authentic performances ever. A shout out has to go out to Yordanos Shiferor, if that's how you pronounce her name, who plays the Ethiopian woman who's the mother of the 18-month-old baby. Absolutely phenomenal. The way in which she connected and bought into Zayn becoming a sort of surrogate older child was beautiful. I mean, it was a beautiful, beautiful relationship that was drawn between her and him. And in anyone else's hands, in another film, it could have felt a bit eggy and a little bit artificial. When I first went in and I knew that there was this idea that he was taking his parents to court and suing them for having him, on one level, that's very unrealistic that a boy would be saying that at all. But on another, he played it so well, and it worked as the one moment of sort of, if you like, magic realism in the film. This is something that needs to be said. This is something that needs to be felt and needs to be heard. And so you forgave that sort of slight artifice of, would he say that? Would he actually bring his parents to court? Would a judge actually, bring the parents in on this basis? So in that sense, it was both poetic and brutally real and charming at the same time. So there was a charm in it, and there were moments of great humour, and there were, as I say, great moments of a real identification with this little boy. He reminded me of the little boy I've been, even though I haven't gone through any of the things that he's gone through. It's a tough watch. You will cry. It's also a film littered with some really eccentric scenes. So you have scenes like the one in the fun fair, but there's also this character who's dressed, well, you think he's dressed like Spider-Man, but actually he's got a cockroach on his chest. By the end of the film, you're left thinking about the idea that the word Capernaum or Capharnaüm translates into chaos. This was a film of emotional chaos. This has to be the film that wins the Academy Award for Best Foreign Picture.
For more film and family fun, don't forget to click the subscribe button and make sure to click the bell to never miss an update.